Everybody, we are officially live. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm joined with a friend and professional colleague, Katie Sipple of Wise Mind Canine. And today we've got a really fun chat planned for you guys. And it's something that I know, Katie, you and I were talking about. There's not a ton of information out there about how to do this. And it's such an important skill. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about dog introductions and mistakes.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chat about one of my favorite topics on earth.
I know it is, and it's something you're so good at. So I'm really glad that we've got you here to talk about it. Before we dive in, do you mind giving my guests a little bit of an introduction to you and your background with training?
Yeah, so my name is Katie Sipple. I am an accredited dog trainer with the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. I recently finally opened my own business, Wise Mind Canine. Before that, most of my experience in the dog world has been a combination of pet and service dog training. I'm actually a former service dog handler. My service dog is retired right now, but I kind of segued into this world of dealing with multi-dog households because not every dog that you get to train to be a service dog is going to work. So I've accumulated many dogs.
Yeah, and accumulating dogs, no matter what age they are, navigating that dog introduction can be really challenging. And I think well, we're going to talk about it, but one of the mistakes people make is going too fast, when we just kind of assume that things are going to work out. Whereas when I talk to my clients about it, which I'm sure it's the same for you, people are always a little shocked with kind of how slow I want things to be, because those positive associations are so important, especially in those early stages.
Yeah, there's definitely a disconnect between what we as professionals know needs to happen and what your average pet owner knows needs to happen. Because if you go on Google and you search introducing dogs, you're going to get like a 2 sentence answer.
Yeah.
It's going to tell you like meet in a neutral location and go on a parallel walk,
Yeah.
and that's it.
And then
and then what else do we do? And what if we can't do a parallel walk? There are, kind of some legitimate reasons for not wanting to do that. I mean, maybe you have dogs that are nervous in novel places. Maybe you have leash reactive dogs. Maybe you're getting home at 1 o'clock in the morning and you're not going to go out to a dark park to introduce your dogs,
Yeah.
there's all these legitimate reasons. So there has to be alternatives and kind of a process for people to follow. And that's kind of a deficit, I would say, in the dog training world, of having a process that works for people, whether it doesn't matter how old their dogs are, how many dogs they have, what behavior problems they have, that they can just kind of work through and do everything effectively.
Yeah. And, I think that's one of the things that I always love as a trainer is that there isn't necessarily a single cookie cut solution to everybody, but that's what can make it really challenging for people as individuals, because even if they find what they think might be a good solution, it's like, well, wait a minute, does this work for me and my dog? Like you said, some people might not be able to do that neutral parallel walk. It might be dark. We might have a single human. So having a variety of solutions to kind of solve this problem of making sure things go smoothly, especially in the beginning, is really huge. So I know that today we're going to talk about some of those mistakes that people make. So the first mistake that a lot of people can make is not preparing ahead of time. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think people don't realize that there are things that they can do before their new dog comes home. We have all sorts of possibilities here because essentially by the time you brought your new dog home, you're stressed, your dogs are stressed, both your old ones and your new ones. And it's just not the best time to be making decisions on the fly.
Yeah.
So we really need to take some time to think about what kind of changes need to happen in our homes before that dog comes home. Do our current dogs need skills? Do we need to get our current dog used to management? Because typically people are not having things up like baby gates and exercise pens, at that point where they're adding another dog. So we really need to think about too, like how these schedules and routines and everything are going to change, how that's going to impact the emotional well-being of your current dog, because you're dividing your time now. So maybe before you were going to the dog park twice a week and training class on Saturdays and doing walks, multiple days. But now your time's divided. And it's not necessarily a good idea for you to be doing these things with both dogs at the same time initially.
Yeah.
So we have to, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's key too, because when we think about preparing for a new dog or preparing for a new puppy coming into the home, we often think about the things we'll need,
Yes.
the new collar, the new harness, the new dog bed, but we don't necessarily think about those bigger changes like home setup and how that could impact our current resident dog, because that dog is going to be experiencing some stress and some schedule changes as well. And so, as soon as you can kind of make that not a big deal for your resident dog or
Right.
dogs, right? Even more important if we've got more than one dog in the house or even more than one species, kind of allowing them that time that they'll need to adjust before that new puppy even comes into the picture.
Right, because otherwise, humans can experience trigger stacking, dogs can experience trigger stacking. The more stress and change we do all at once, the more likely it is that no living being in this house is at their best. And we really want everyone to be at their best when we're doing these introductions.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the skills component too, because a lot of my clients, when they're bringing in a new puppy, they're only thinking about the new puppy, but they don't think about how solid some really essential foundation behaviors need to be, because we talk about, when we train behaviors, we talk about the 3 Ds, right?
Sure.
Distance, distraction, duration. And we don't even realize that having another animal in the house is like the biggest distraction of them all,
Yes.
especially if our resident dog sees them as a playmate.
Oh,
And
for
so
sure.
while we might have had a really great settle, it's like the new puppy is like exploding the brain of the resident teenager who just wants to go romp around and play. And so really
Yeah.
making sure you're looking at your training plan and foundations ahead of time is huge.
And if you're going from a single dog household to having a new dog in your house for the first time, it's even harder for you to prepare your skills to that level.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't necessarily have that exact distraction to practice
Right.
with ahead of time. So you've got to kind of get creative with it and figure out
Right.
other ways you can build that behavior up.
And then leave that space once your new dog is home to practice those skills with barriers in place.
Yeah. Yeah. And those barriers are key. And that kind of brings us into this next idea of keeping things slow, because a lot of people really rush this process and think, okay, they're getting along great, management gone. And
Yes.
I'm like, wait, what are you doing? Don't do that. Because there's so many little fine tuning and nuances we have to do to make sure that relationship is really solid, because even if they're friendly, it doesn't necessarily mean everything's going to be, dandy. We need to make sure that we keep that process slow.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a little bit of this excitement of, yes, my new dog is home and my dogs are going to be best friends. And a lot of us go into it thinking, like, yes, that's why I got another dog, so that they can play together and I can watch them. It'll be great. But we have to take our time to get there.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I think about it this way. So, as people, we have all gone through transitions, right? Like a new job, a new home, all of these sorts of things where like all of these environments and routines and expectations are being changed, and we can struggle with that. And I think we need to like leave room for our dogs to work through that without having to be in each other's face 24/7,
Hmm.
because you can definitely have a honeymoon period. You can have those first 3 days and everything's great, but as they have to navigate more and more situations together, you start seeing like these little conflicts coming up.
Yeah. And I think that for some people who might not be super aware of dog signaling and communication, one of the things I really try to do is help my clients really learn how to read their dogs,
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't pick up on those little signals of stress, those little signals of, I'm trying to be a good dog and avoid conflict, and those little things that the normal pet person might not pick up on are huge, because that is where we need to step in and kind of say, hey, I need to back this up, or I need to use more management to make this
Right.
process a little slower, because we can certainly have long lasting damaging effects if we move through this process too quickly.
Yeah, and I really want to validate for people how subtle some of these things can be. I have had a couple of clients where I've seen their videos of their early introductions. They're with me because they have dog aggression.
Hmm.
And, it is so subtle. It's like, a weight shift away. It's trying to back away a little bit, like not fleeing, not cowering, not anything like that. So, and the end result is like are these big things like resource guarding and actual dog fights, so it can
Yeah.
escalate, but it is hard to see, and I don't expect any of my clients to have noticed these things. They're
Hmm.
really tough sometimes.
Yeah, they are tough. But they're so important for us to continue to keep an eye on so that we can make sure that
Absolutely.
this process goes smooth. So one of the other mistakes, and this often happens as people are getting new puppies, I often hear, as I'm sure you do as well, I'm getting a new puppy as a playmate, right, for my
Yes.
other dog. And we always kind of, oh, well, wait a minute. Is that the right thing to do? Does your dog really want a playmate? And ultimately, I think we always need to kind of check in with ourselves and figure out why we're getting this second dog. If this second dog ultimately needs to be the adult, the
Yeah.
human's responsibility. Talk to us a little bit about some of those challenges when we kind of have that incorrect mindset of thinking this dog is going to just be a playmate.
Yeah, so I think when we start thinking about our dogs as being there, our new dog as being there for our old dog, we're not taking into consideration that like this new dog is its own individual with its own needs and feelings. And so we put these new dogs into situations that we shouldn't, that can cause stress and impact those relationships, because these early interactions are very important for setting the tone of how things are going to be. So like I don't know if you've seen them, but like I've seen videos on YouTube where people actually put their puppies like in a gift box
Yeah,
and then present them to their new dog. And like, okay, from a human level, yes, this sounds cute. I see how people get there, but I'm watching the body language and how stiff the puppy
cringing.
is, and like the puppy like has come out of where it is used to being for its entire life, and it is in a new place, and now we're going to shove them in a box and have them presented to an older dog. So like I don't want people literally or figuratively treating their new dog like a gift to their
Yeah,
other dog, or vice versa. And I
yeah.
think too it can lead to like siding with one dog over the other,
Hmm.
which we have to be, neutral for our dogs. We have
Yeah,
to care about both dogs equally, rather than, choosing, who's the favorite, who's the instigator, who's the problem dog.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And I think that if we can keep that neutral mindset, it's much easier for us as humans to observe the dogs as individuals,
Yes.
not pick favorites, and really make sure that the needs of both dogs are being met, because we can have problems both ways. We can have problems where the puppy is a little too emphatic about playing and maybe the other resident dog is not. And then vice versa, we can have, the resident dog that's a little too intense and it's starting to freak the puppy out. And both ways, that's really damaging for that
Yes.
relationship. And I think it's always important too that we need to make sure that we're setting the dogs up in an environment where they're rehearsing what we want,
Yes.
right? and
Absolutely.
and both ways, no matter if it's the puppy that's littler or the older larger resident dog, we don't want that bullying type behavior. We don't want that,
Right.
magnetization that they can get. So I think that being able to look at them as individuals and really kind of observe them and meet both of their needs separately is really
Right.
key.
Yeah, and a lot of my cases where I'm seeing this dog aggression, where I'm having to repair relationships that have gone wrong, it's because we don't have this understanding of how to meet dog needs
Hmm.
beyond physical exercise and food. There are so many components, and we need to make sure that we're meeting them for each individual, because it's not a recipe. It doesn't work for, you can't look at your three dogs and do the same plan for each of them, because
Yeah.
it's just not, it's not going to meet their needs. So I spend a lot of time educating people on how to do that and coming up with plans for individual dogs. I think
Yeah.
the other
Go
thing
on. Mm-hmm.
I've noticed is, you have to think about the relationships. But once we go beyond 2 dogs, now we have a lot more dog relationships.
Yeah.
And so we have to consider each connection between dogs individually and then build that up and then bring the combination together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge because once you start having 3 dogs or 4 dogs, each dog's going to have a relationship with each individual dog.
Right.
And then you also have that group dynamic that you're having to manage. So the more
Yes.
dogs in the house, kind of the more complicated that gets.
Definitely.
And I do find too that once people kind of come up with this, we'll keep calling it a recipe, this recipe of fulfilling the dog's needs, they tend to think that it's cookie cutter and that
Yeah.
can apply to that next dog, particularly the more dogs in the house we get, because it's easier, right? It's
Right.
easier to look at a house of 4 and do the same thing with each dog and think that that's going to work. But ultimately, that can cause problems and it can leave a lot of gaps. And when we're not meeting all of those dogs' individual needs, right, then we've got
Yep.
problems with the whole group together.
For sure. And I think too, we have to keep in mind that needs change. They can change too after you add another dog. So we always have to be ready to adjust the plan. If you're seeing problem behaviors that you don't like, then it's time to look at needs first and see if we can help the dogs out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, along with those needs, we often have physical items that we will have. We will have food, we will have beds and resting areas, we
Oh
have
yes.
bones and toys and enrichment items. And all of those resources can sometimes cause problems in multi-dog households. So we certainly need to be mindful of that as we are bringing dogs together, right? To
Yes.
make sure that that's not causing problems.
Right. I would like to change how we approach resources in new multi-dog households. This is how I would like you to approach it. I would like you to assume that is a problem. I don't typically say that. I don't want to go from this pessimistic angle, but this is the most preventative way to do this. So we're going to assume all resources are a problem until
Mm-hmm.
we find out that they are not, and we have this pleasant surprise and we're happy. Because I don't want to put dogs in a situation where they don't have strong relationships and suddenly they are navigating these complex moments of I want to keep this, and now this new dog I don't know is invading my space or
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. And, you know, and a lot of people don't know how to support their dogs in that moment because we're going to talk about it later, but that myth of letting the dogs work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the resource problem is definitely the number one reason I see dog aggression. And it's not just in the adult dogs, guys, it's puppies.
Mm-hmm.
It's young 11 to 16-week-old puppies who are now defensive and guarding every possible category: toys, people, sleeping location, chews, food, treat. It's a problem. So definitely when I'm working with people in my course or through private lessons, we're finding a good way to expose the dogs to resources at a distance, and usually starting with barriers in between them before we move them closer and expect them to kind of figure this out. And sometimes we just decide, for instance, for me, the dinner, I'm just not going to mess with it. We're just going to eat dinner in our separate spaces out of sight of each other, and there's just no need to have them together. So it doesn't have to be complicated. If they don't need to have it together, then I don't do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's huge because I think a lot of people think that in order for it not to be a problem, we need to teach them how to do it in close proximity.
Right.
And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that them not having a problem comes down to lots of history of it not being a problem.
Right.
And so by forcing the situation and kind of going back to that second mistake we talked about of rushing the introduction phase,
Yes.
right? If we rush it and we push them too close together too quickly with too many resources, we're going to create problems. Whereas how we really need to be looking at it is preventing it from even being a problem by allowing all the dogs to enjoy these resources in peace. right?
Yep.
Without that need of competition even being there.
It's just the kind way to do things. I mean, the biggest one that I see as a problem is the dinner bowls.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea of like, I need to have all my dogs around me. They need to sit and wait for their bowls, and then they need to eat. So it ends up with all of these dogs in the same space together with no barriers, able to like stare at each other visually and put all of these social pressures on the other dog who's eating. We've got dogs guzzling down their food because they're panicked. You know, I've had to explain it to people like I'm going to describe to you a nightmare restaurant. And in the nightmare restaurant, what we do is you are seated with a random person.
Oh,
You don't get
no.
to pick your person. This is the rule of the restaurant. You sit next to them. But now the person that you're sitting next to is kind of strange. I mean, they're scooting closer to you, trying to, you know, look at your plate. All of a sudden, they're like reaching over and grabbing food off your plate, and we're people, right?
Yeah.
So we can like call over the waiter and be like, "Hey, I want another table." We can, you know, get up and leave because this is weird. But you know, or some people, maybe you're really hungry, maybe you're confrontational, maybe you yell at them, maybe you push their hand away, you know, that sort of thing. So basically, when we put the dogs in the same room without a barrier, we're putting them at the nightmare restaurant. And we don't want to do that because the things that our dogs do at the nightmare restaurant are like growling, snarling, lunging, biting, like things that we find absolutely unacceptable, like as pet owners, but that might feel reasonable when we're in the nightmare restaurant. So I have a lot of people getting mad at their dogs that they can't eat in the same room, but you know, it's hard. It's hard.
That analogy made me so cringy. I'm like still cringing on the inside from that. But it gives you a really nice kind of way to be compassionate for your dog in that circumstance, you know. And when you think of it, you're like that, you're like, why would I do that to my dog? I wouldn't. That's crazy, you know. And so allowing, you know, these resources that we know they want, giving them space, creating that space for them so that they don't have to be all up in each other's business, feeling stressed, because that stress can stay with them and that stress can become attached towards that other dog. And we never want them feeling threatened or uncomfortable by the other dog's presence. And that's something that we as pet parents, as pet owners and caregivers can do for them. You know, we can create that safe space for them. And I imagine that this is even particularly more important when we know that the dog in the house, the resident dog,
Oh, yes.
already has some mixed emotions about resources.
Yes. I mean, there's a reason that I got into this topic. I mean, I have some complex behavior items in my home. I have a dog who resource guards. I have a dog who, you know, is a senior. He doesn't want to play. He doesn't want to interact. He doesn't want people, you know, waking him up or dogs waking him up. So, yeah, we have to consider, especially if you know you have resource guarding. If you know you have resource guarding, two other dogs, I know that it is difficult to work on that when you do not have another dog in your home, but you need to get a professional to work through your introduction.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to save you a lot of heartache in the long run.
Yeah, it is. And it's worth it. It's worth it because trying to mend those relationships after the fact is significantly harder.
Yeah, prevention is key in all these situations.
Yeah. So one of the things we kind of touched on already that I want to get back to is this idea of bullying behavior, because oftentimes we think that play is oh well, you know, they just really love each other, they're playing really intensely, and people might not pick up on what bullying behavior looks like. Do you mind just starting with like explaining what that could look like for people?
Yeah, so in the initial request to play is usually a lot of times where it starts. So you'll have one dog kind of stiff laying on the floor, maybe turning away, maybe you know, giving a just like a little irritated growl, but then you've got say a puppy pushing into their space, just repeatedly pushing into their space and not responding to any of those social signals. You know, the dog might be turning away, trying to move away, trying to diffuse the situation. But if you have another dog that just keeps pushing, sometimes that can actually result in play, but that's conflicted play and we don't want it, and it's not good for relationships. Like
Yeah.
this is the moment where we step in and we support whatever dog is saying no, and we settle the other dog into a new activity.
Yeah. And that bullying behavior can happen the other way around too. Cause,
Yes,
often we think of like an older dog who maybe isn't so keen on play and the rambunctious puppy, but it can also happen if we've got a really kind of overexcited younger dog who's turning around and trying to play with a puppy that maybe is a little more timid, maybe not wanting
definitely.
that social interaction.
Yeah, they can definitely be more forward and kind of just create like the best way is really to do a consent test, right? If you're not sure, if you're looking at play and you're like, oh, I don't know if my dog is uncomfortable, take the more overtly aroused, excitable dog who's really pushing the play. Just hold them back for a second and watch what your other dog does. Do they come back in? Okay, maybe they're enjoying that play. You know,
Hmm.
do they walk away? Well, then we're done.
Yeah.
We need to go do something else. But definitely, like, unhealthy play is is pretty easy to notice once you know the signs.
Hmm.
You know, if your dogs are not changing roles, that can be a clue that maybe this is not great play right now. So
Hmm.
if we've got one dog on top and they're staying on top, and we're not switching to the other dog on top, or we've got one dog chasing, the other dog running, and they're not switching, that's one of your clues that this might be play that you need to interrupt right now.
Yeah. I I love that you mentioned that conflicted play is not what we want because
Right.
we can often see the dog that goes, play with me, play with me, play with me,
Yes.
play with me, play with me. And eventually the other dog might, not always, but might go, okay, fine. And then they
Yes.
play. And that's not going to feel great for the dog that eventually gave in and started to play. And it's also going to rehearse some undesired behavior in the one that continued to ask for play,
Yes.
reinforcing this idea that if you continue to ask, it will happen. And that's not great because that can start to almost reinforce that concept of that
Oh
dog
yeah.
being a bit of a bully.
And sometimes the okay fine can turn into no, forget you. And it turns
Hmm.
into a conflict between dogs, that there
Yeah.
can be a breaking point.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you mentioned good play being kind of equal. We know we want to look for the dogs changing roles. So we want one dog to kind of go after one and jump on them. And then we want that jumper to turn around and be the one that's getting jumped on. Talk to some of our listeners about specific body language things that you're looking for besides just
Yes.
them reciprocating that play.
Yes. You want loose, wiggly bodies. You want curved spines. You want bouncy behavior. Okay. You don't want a stiff dog that's pointed in one direction. You don't, sometimes dogs will freeze and play and then they'll go ahead and, have good play. But if you're seeing like a prolonged freeze, like if you're counting and you're getting like that 5 to 10 second range, I don't know. Watch what's happening there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Those stiff bodies, and I think the other thing that we can see is, well, maybe they're opening their mouth and they're kind of vocalizing, and sometimes that's okay, but
yes,
are they turning their head and trying to get away? You
right.
might see a little bit of play. And whenever that starts to happen, that's that great idea to kind of step in, grab the one that's maybe being a little more emphatic about things, and then wait and see what happens. Do we
Yeah,
shake it off and come back to play, or do we go, yeah, no, I didn't want that?
right. Yeah, or the yawning, the coming by the person,
Hmm.
to kind of like be a barrier between them and the other dog. There are a lot of reasons it might.
My older girl in our house right now definitely does that. When she has had enough, she just looks away from my younger dog. She walks over and she sits by me because she knows that I will intervene, ask him to go lay down. And that's a really nice thing to be able to have. It shows that relationship that you have with the dog. And it's always important to be able to step up and be that advocate for any dog in your house when they need it.
Definitely. I mean, that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see our dogs coming to us for help.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to see dogs trying to work it out because we don't like how dogs work it out. You know,
Hmm.
so if they can know that they can look to us to fix a problem, you're going to have a happier, more peaceful household.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. The
Yeah.
dog's working it out. Oftentimes, people will use that expression. Always makes me cringe, as I'm sure it does you. And it can be used in a
Yes.
variety of circumstances. It can be, them actually in a fight. Oh, just let him work it out. It can be issues over resources where we want them to just figure things out, or even during play. If one
Yeah.
dog doesn't want to play, well, just let them work it out. That other dog can tell them. Why do we not want to do that, Katie?
You know, first of all, it's going to degrade the relationship, period. The other reason is our dogs correcting each other does not teach them how to behave appropriately.
Mhm.
And we, as the people, we've got opposable thumbs and big brains. We've got to get in there, and we've got to help them learn how to respond to each other
Yeah.
in these situations.
I love that. We have to help them learn how they should respond to each other, because sometimes they don't always make the right choice. And if we
No.
want that relationship to continue to thrive, we need to help them, especially if they're making those wrong choices or if they don't know what that right choice is. Helping them diffuse that situation, helping them learn they can walk away, they can go relax.
I think too, a lot of people have this idea that all dog corrections are appropriate. And it's
Hmm.
just not true. A lot of dogs take it way too far, way too fast. They're not giving fair warning that
Hmm.
we're escalating towards this point, and it can be very traumatic. Say if you have a puppy who is getting corrected by an older dog.
Yeah. Yeah. Damaging on that relationship where that puppy is not going to look so kindly at that other dog anymore.
No.
And I think that idea of the dogs not communicating super clear can also go towards those puppies, where you can see that puppy kind of pester that older dog a little
Oh
too
yeah.
much, even when that older dog might be signaling correctly, but the younger dog isn't understanding that, right? They're
Yes.
not understanding what may be a little bit of a lip lift or flicking of the tongue or a harsh
Right.
eye, and that's where we can help that puppy then understand as well, hey, that means we need to disengage, and kind of getting in there and helping them do that.
Yeah, and it's just kind of a normal developmental issue where
Hmm.
they just have different opinions of what's fun, and they're trying things out. And it doesn't make your puppy bad or wrong. It's just a puppy, and puppies are annoying sometimes. I mean,
Yeah.
dogs feel that way. I feel that way. I train dogs, and sometimes I think puppies are annoying. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it is. But having that understanding then and knowing that we don't want to just let them work it out is super important in that relationship.
Definitely.
I know that as dogs start to kind of get along well, people will be inclined to maybe give their dogs a little more freedom and allow their
Yes.
dogs to be alone together. And that's not always the best idea on what we want to do for them.
Yeah, it goes back to that, rushing the introduction issue.
Mhm.
I tend to keep a pretty close watch on my dogs when they're learning to be together for about the first year.
Mhm.
Um, and they slowly graduate to having unsupervised time together. Like we'll start with they're always supervised and they're in one room and I'm in it and I'm actively watching. Now I'm doing something else in the same room. Then I'm opening up another room. So now we're in two rooms. They can get out of my sight a little bit, but if anything goes wrong, I can be right there and kind of just slowly peeling that management back and seeing how it goes. And I
Mhm.
think every time you pull back a management layer, you've got to recheck your resources
Mhm.
because what's fine when you're in the room might not be fine when you're not.
Yeah. Or what's fine with a baby gate between them might not be fine once that baby gate
Exactly.
walks away. So that's really important because, again, we're trying to protect the dogs and make sure they're not having negative associations. And I think that what people can forget about in particular, when you mentioned a year, for my breed, I do even a hair longer, because as we go through that teenager phase, we certainly can have challenges as developmentally they're changing. Their brains are still developing. Their ability to make choices
Yes.
is definitely still developing. So we can have that relationship between the dogs even change dramatically as the dogs start to go through different developmental phases.
Yeah, and I've definitely had to make some new choices. Like my puppy Fish, he is now a little over 2, and he's different at social maturity,
Hmm.
and my other dogs are treating him differently. So there's been a little more management going on around certain resources because suddenly he's older, and now one of my other dogs is not okay with certain things. So we're kind of having to rework that. So we definitely have to view like management and these layers as something that can come back. You
I
know,
love that.
we can always default back to that plan. That's what I love about having a thoughtful introduction process with like a lot of management tools, because you can use it for the life of your dogs. If you
Hmm.
encounter an issue as they age, just put a layer of management back up. You already have it. You don't have to go to the store. It's right there for you.
Yeah, I love that because again, with that relationship that's continually developing, once they have a stressful situation happen, it can linger for a little bit.
It
We
can.
don't want to assume that they're just going to get over it, and being able to fall back on those layers of management that we as humans are already comfortable with. Theoretically, the dog should already be comfortable with them, will give you that ability to make sure that we're not having any more negative associations happen while we readdress what that problem area might be and figure out how we're going to rebuild that relationship, avoid negative challenges in the future.
It gives everyone space to breathe. And
Yeah.
it's another reason why I like using management from the day you bring, your puppy home, because you have a life outside of your dogs. I understand that. So let's create a scenario where you're not playing dog referee 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah, even if the dogs do get along,
Yeah, it,
even if
it can be exhausting.
yeah. So sometimes what can happen as our dogs are starting to interact, they're interacting well with each other, or we think it's going well. I see a lot of clients removing management for significant portions of the day, which ends up resulting in a lot of kind of over aroused play that's
Yes,
getting rehearsed for long periods of time. And I think that can be quite damaging on relationships as well. And it starts to get the dogs in this mindset of, all day long, this is what we do, which is
right.
not healthy. We do
Yeah,
want dogs to, believe it or not, we do want dogs to learn how to chill out around each other and how to relax. And that's just as important as it is for them getting along well.
definitely. I mean, in my course, I really focus on, how can we get these dogs used to doing things in parallel? They don't need to be interacting with each other all the time. One dog can be over here chewing on a nylabone. The other one can be over there sitting next to the couch, with a person. They don't have to be interacting. And we have to teach them that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're
I,
playing, like you said.
Yeah. If we don't teach them that and we just kind of leave that relationship up to chance, I think that oftentimes that ends up devolving the relationship more than it
It does.
actually develops it, which I think is a big misconception with a lot of people. They think the dogs are getting along great. I'm just going to let them, do their own dog thing. I wanted them
Yep.
to be playmates and now they're playing. So, have at it. And that free for all can be quite harmful.
And we can have those moments where like over arousal tilts into that hyper arousal. And now we've got a fight that came out of play
Hmm.
that we just don't
Yeah.
want. And honestly, just most people do not want super boisterous play running through their house all day,
Yeah.
you know? And that's hard when from the beginning they have been allowed to do that. It's harder to pull back on it than it is to prevent that from being the norm.
Yeah. And again, common theme that keeps popping up here is management because
All the
management
management.
can help us make that more of a reality, that idea of yes we can play, but yes we can also relax and do independent activities.
Definitely. It's key to teaching that in the beginning.
So let's talk about that play for just a second that kind of devolves into a challenge. I think a lot of people don't realize that can happen, and we can see that quite a bit. It's pretty common,
Yeah.
especially once we get into our teenager phase where dogs are a little more drivey and have big emotions and maybe a little less control over their emotions. So
Yeah.
what are some body language things that we look for in play and with those dogs where we decide this is good play or this is when I need to interrupt and not let this become something bigger?
Yeah. I mean, the bigger versions, I would say, are like the head over. The When dogs rear back and they've got both of them have their feet in the air, sort of thing, when we're like pawing up at each other. When we've got dilated pupils or panting, or we've got, almost like a stress grimace where they're pulling their lips back towards their face and we've got wrinkles that we can see. There are so many,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, it's hard to name all of them because there are so many of
It
them.
really is. I usually there's I think it's called Chicago veterinary behavior that I send a lot of my clients to because they have great free body language resources.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's essential, especially in a multi-dog household. More important, maybe even than just a single dog household, because now, again, as a human, especially in those beginning stages, you want to be able to almost predict what's going to happen next.
Right.
It's not just reacting to what you see, it's watching those small signals start to pop up and knowing, okay, if this continues, it's going to escalate. This is where I need to step in to prevent something from happening.
Right. Because when we're reactive, we can get in these loops of the behavior that just keeps happening. So we definitely have to, I love Chirag Patel's quote about, we have to listen for the whispers so our animals don't have to scream.
Mhm.
We can stop it when it's a whisper. We don't have to deal with dog fights. We don't have to deal with, snarly um, issues over toys or anything like that. Like we can learn to read them. We can learn to slow them down. I mean, there are ways to just not even completely stop play, but just enforce a break in play, you know?
Mhm.
Just for dogs where it's appropriate, you can scatter some low value food like Cheerios in the grass. So now they're snuffling, and then they'll
Mhm.
engage in play again. Or we can quickly call them to come to us and sit. This is where it's important to have skills in your multi-dog household so that you can moderate play without having to yell, without having to get physically involved. Because sometimes if you have to, physically pull a dog out or you're yelling, you can escalate it even further.
Yeah. Yeah, I always remind people that when we have to do that kind of thing, it absolutely should be last resort because
Yes.
it's like dumping fuel on the fire. The
Yes.
dog is learning to fear us. The dog could be building negative associations with body handling, which we certainly don't want. The dog could feel us and be so aroused that they redirect on us.
Yes.
They could be building negative associations with each other, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I think that too often people will allow it to get to that point where they have to get in there, where we really, like you said, need to be reading those little subtle signals and going, you know what, I think it's time for a break. We're not even going to let it escalate to that point because, especially for our young dogs, the longer they play, the more intense it's going to get, the more aroused they're going to get, and the more of these undesired behaviors we're going to start seeing from them.
Definitely. And as you said, like you want to pull them out. You want to have to grab them out as a last resort. That's like your airbag in your car.
Yeah.
Okay? You're crashing into a wall at that point.
Yeah.
We need earlier skills like we need brake tapping or hitting it harder or slamming on the brakes or an emergency brake. You kind of got to graduate up that chain
Mhm.
of what you need.
Yeah, and that requires a little bit of one-on-one time as well as group time. I think
Yes.
that oftentimes when we get into these multi-dog scenarios, it's easier to do things with all the dogs. Or
Hmm.
sometimes people will feel that I feel bad for the dog I'm leaving at home or not working with, so they all need to be involved. But again, looking at each individual dog in the household and managing that dog's relationship with you,
Yes.
right? And spending that one-on-one time teaching those foundation skills, teaching those interrupters so that you have ways to interrupt a single dog as well as the whole group peacefully
Yes.
without escalating the scenario.
Because yeah, I've seen it a lot where where I have clients say, I train my dogs, and I'm like, okay, can I see it? And they show me that they train them together, and they really like each dog has their own needs and training, so we've really got to separate them, and it's just like a higher layer of difficulty to have to learn next to another dog. In my house, dogs learn skills, one dog, then two dogs together, then the other two dogs together, and then finally the three dogs together. We don't want to jump to, we have four dogs in a room and they're all learning something at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it doesn't work like that. At least it won't work well like that, because the dogs are being distractions for each other. The dogs might not all have that skill at the same level. So even, taking that into consideration as you start to combine, where are these skills? Are they matching up with one another? Because it's unfair to expect them all to just be at the same level if in that one-on-one time they haven't been.
Yes, exactly.
So obviously everybody wants the best for their dogs, but sometimes you do have to get a professional involved, right? Yes. There are certain circumstances where maybe we've got multiple species in the house. Maybe we know we're bringing in a dog that might have some prey drive, and we've got some cats as well as small dogs in the house. Or, maybe we know we have some underlying concerns, I'll say, with the existing resident dog. So what are some things that you look for or recommend that clients kind of keep an eye out for in terms of when they should get a professional involved to really help them kind of maximize these early introductions?
Yeah. If you are having struggles with management and that's making you want to pull down the management to rush your introduction, you need to get help from a professional, because I don't want you to have more problems on top of, the issues with being alone. Things like resource guarding, for sure. If you know your dog has a tendency to resource guard and you are adding another dog, just start with one. If you have a dog that is leash reactive to other dogs, it's going to be helpful to work with someone. Definitely like a dog who is fearful, or who has difficulty with new changes, or is scared of other dogs out in public and you're adding another dog. Professional again. I mean, there are so many reasons to get a professional when introducing dogs.
Yeah. And I guess the underlying thing here too is that you don't need to have issues to get a professional involved. If you are bringing a new dog in, a lot of our clients will reach out, hey, we're getting a new puppy. I'm like, I'm so glad you called. Let's start right now. Let's make sure that your resident dog has the skills they need before we even, think about that new one coming home.
Yeah. And that goes to, the mistake number one. We have to change how people think about bringing a new dog home. We need to do prevention. I mean, that's all it is. It really is just prevention. And, I hate to see when people end up in these very heartbreaking situations where they have dog fights, they're considering rehoming, all of these other things. One of the biggest reasons that dogs are returned to breeders or shelters is because they don't get along with another dog in the home. Mm-hmm. So if we can change how people view adding another dog and create a situation where everyone's choosing prevention, that would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah, it would. Because again, and we get calls all the time, I'm bringing a new puppy home. When should I start training? Right away. Day one. Right away. I bring my puppies into the home and day one we're doing training. And even if it's a single dog household, starting training early is important. That's even more important.
You got to start before. Yeah. You got to go before, guys.
Yeah.
I know it's a hard ask. I know I'm asking you to do something that, classic introduction advice does not ask you to do. But yeah, I'm asking you to start before your new dog comes home, because by the time your new dog comes home, with the amount of things that people need to learn to have a thriving multi-dog household that they can enjoy, that doesn't stress them out, there's so much learning to do, and you're not going to want to do it when you have your new dog sitting next to you, because it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work raising a puppy. So we need to think about raising the multi-dog household.
Guys. It's painful.
Yeah. So I know that you've got two really great options for people, whether they are bringing in another adult dog or bringing in a new puppy. Can you tell us a little bit about the Virtual Puppy Summit that's coming up and your presentation? We'll start with that one.
Yeah, so at the Virtual Puppy Summit, I'm talking about creating a thriving multi dog household from introduction to essentially the rest of their lives together. So I do go into some of my advice on introductions. I have a full course on it, so I can't touch on everything, but I do talk about that from a puppy perspective. And then I kind of go into these other pieces of creating you know, these pillars of having a good multi-dog household, security, safety, trust, meeting dog needs, and, various other pieces that you really need to know. So I was
Yeah.
hoping to just kind of cram as much as I could into that presentation.
I know it's good. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Thank
And that
you.
would be helpful whether or not people already have that new puppy in their home or if they're planning on bringing one in, say within the next year.
Definitely. And a lot of the advice also applies to older dogs being added to the home. So if you have an older dog and you're interested in the presentation, I am generally talking about multi-dog households as well.
Awesome. Now, I know that you also have a really fantastic online course. So if people are looking for a little more one-on-one time from the expert herself, talk to
Thank
us
you.
about your Multi-Dog Household 101 course.
Yeah, so it's called Dog Dog Introductions and Relationship Building. It goes from before your new dog comes home, before guys, to essentially to having your dogs out together unsupervised. So it's kind of a 20-stage process. I lead you through it step by step. There's no guesswork in introducing your dogs with my program.
I
So
love that.
I think there are 20 lectures, 10 skills, and 20 stages. This is a large course. You are not meant to complete it in 6 weeks. Please do not try it. You will be upset with me, and I promise it is not meant to be 6 weeks. Okay, this is like a lifestyle course. This is like, how do I live in a multi-dog household from now until forever?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I offer that. I offer it at do-it-yourself level, so it's cheap. I have a group level, and then I have private training programs. Usually, I'm seeing uh, cases that need behavior modification because
Yeah.
I do use the system to reintegrate dogs who are having problems.
Yeah. So I dropped those links for everybody in the description for the Virtual Puppy Summit. And if you guys attend Virtual Puppy Summit, Katie's presentation will be one of several. It's a really nice lineup of everything you will need for your puppy, and you get access to it for a year. So there's a link to that. And I have a link for Katie's website, specifically to her multi-dog household class that she just talked about, which sounds incredible. And again, I'm really glad that you not only created this course, but came here to talk to us about it because, as you and I mentioned, it's just something where there's not a ton of info. It's like do the parallel walks, and then what do we do next? And so I
Yeah,
love having that resource for people to be able to dive in because it's not easy. It's not easy managing a multi-dog household.
I'm on a mission, Chelsea. I'm on a mission to change this,
I
change
love
how
it.
we view this.
It's so important. Well, any last minute things you can think of or tips for people for our dog introductions?
Let me look at my notes here real quick. Oh, there is one thing I want to emphasize for people. You do have the power to influence how your dogs feel about each other. You might not know how to do it, but you can do it. So you don't have to look at your dogs and see conflict or see dogs who don't like each other and unpack and live there. It is within your control. We don't have to do this hope for the best or anything like that. Like we can change it and we should change it. So, if you need help, you know where to find me.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.